Hello, I'm Kate Mackay, Associate Film Curator here at the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive, and I'm super excited to be launching No Regrets, a celebration of Marlon Riggs today. 30 years since the broadcast of Tongues Untied and 25 years since Riggs's death, his work remains as urgent, relevant, and necessary as ever. And from now through November, we'll be screening all of Riggs's videos, along with works that address similar issues in interesting ways. I have some thanks before we start. I'd really like to thank California Newsreel, Frameline, Berkeley Arts and Design, and the Graduate School of Journalism for their support of these programs. Everyone was so enthusiastic when I said I was embarking on this program, and I got a lot of support from all these different people, and I'm very grateful for it. And also a special thanks to Vivian Kleinman, who was the person who came to us, I think maybe 2 years ago, and said, well, the 30th anniversary of Tongues Untied is coming up, and this is a great opportunity to look at Riggs's work. Are you interested in doing something? And of course, we were so excited to take another look at his work and share it with all of you. So thanks so much, Vivian, for your encouragement and support along the way. Tonight, we have with us the Black Life curators, Chika Okoye and Ryanaustin Dennis, and they'll be here to discuss the film after the screening. So I'm just going to say a couple of words of introduction of both of them. Chika is a historian of liberation movements and a theorist of freedom, working on a master's degree in ethnic studies at San Francisco State University, and she's been the co-curator of the Black Life series here at BAMPFA since 2017. And helps to organize non-institutional spaces of study, including the Oakland Summer School. Ryanaustin Dennis is an Oakland-based curator, artist, and writer, co-curator of the Black Life series at BAMPFA. I think just this year was the newest member of the Black Life curatorial team. He's interested in how 20th and 21st century experimental performance, film, and writing histories are shaped by the metaphysics of blackness. And they've done curatorial work for Cadist, East Side Arts Alliance, Betty Ono, and is their Southern Exposure Curatorial Council Fellow. So it'll be great to have them in conversation after Black Is, Black Ain't. And finally, we are extremely honored that Nicole Atkinson Roach is here with us today to introduce Black Is, Black Ain't, and to join Ryanaustin and Chika in conversation after the film. Nicole Atkinson Roach is a two-time Emmy Award-winning producer, director, and writer, and former student of Marlon Riggs. She worked with Riggs on several of his films, including Color Adjustments, No, Je ne regrette rien, and co-produced and finished his final film, Black Is, Black Ain't. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Nicole Atkinson Roach.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I also want to thank the folks here at BAMPFA for this series honoring Marlon and for inviting me to participate. As she mentioned, my name is Nicole Atkinson Roach, and I had the privilege to be a part of Marlon's life for 6 short years. First as my professor and mentor at the university here at the Graduate School of Journalism, and then as my mentor, who I worked with on several projects, including Color Adjustment, No Regret, and the film you're about to see tonight, Black Is, Black Ain't. Excuse me, I had to type this up because Marlon was truly a mentor and a significant person in my life. And the past couple weeks, as I've been thinking about him a lot more, I just became super emotional, and I wanted to really make sure I was coherent when I spoke to you guys. So I will just kind of read these comments. Marlon was a true visionary in every sense of the word, inspired, inspiring, inventive, imaginative, insightful, innovative, clever, gifted, and resourceful. He had the amazing ability to combine the personal with the political, to confront difficult topics in a way that forced you to step outside yourself and your preconceived notions. He tackled issues like Black representation and Black identity from both sides, flipping these topics on their head, not just confronting and deconstructing racism, but oftentimes pulling back the curtain to reveal painful truths about how we as Black folk continue to draw exclusionary lines around ourselves, whether it is based on who you love, how much melanin you had, or what education level you achieved. If you look at his body of work from Ethnic Notions to Tongues Untied to Black Is, 30 plus years later, it all resonates today, and unfortunately so. Marlon was unapologetic, vulnerable, courageous, thoughtful, pioneering, authentic, and most importantly, relatable. He had a genius way of connecting all the dots in innovative ways, calling on ancestors, quoting literary greats, tapping into contemporary art forms like DJing, spoken word, using archival footage, and weaving all aspects of himself, dancing, singing, chanting, in a compelling mashup that forced the viewer to pay attention and think long after watching his work. On a personal level, I was truly lucky to have known and worked with him. He had a tremendous impact on my life and in who I have become and how I think about things. As a mentor, he gently pushed me to face my fears and trust my instincts. I remember when he first asked me to field produce on Black Is, and I'm trying to remember if it was North or South Carolina, but one of the Carolinas, I often get it confused for some reason, to schedule a shoot of the African Village and find a family reunion. I remember telling him, Marlon, I don't know that I'm ready to actually do this. I'm a little bit afraid. And he said to me, I'd rather you be afraid because I know you will use that emotion to fuel you to succeed. He was the type of person who you would look forward to getting critique from. Why? Because he made you better. He gave feedback in a way that honored your vision, not his. That was why he was such a great instructor. And as a human, he was approachable and down to earth, the type of person I could take to a Janet Jackson concert and break out and dance together in the parking lot on our way out, which is something that really happened back in 1989. He was funny, had an incredible sense of humor, and an even more incredible smile. Tonight, I am honored to introduce Black Is, Black Ain't. It was Marlon's last film and his last call to action. His was a simple message back then, and yet so important today. The way forward is love and acceptance. Without further ado, here is, Black Ain't.
Hey. Thank you again, Nicole, for coming, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. I guess we're just going to talk. Yeah. I guess my thoughts on it are, it just like touches on so many different things, like literally land, talking about land and Black people's relation to land, ruralness, family, kinships, at the time, homosexuality, that term, Black women, poverty, gangs, history, class, Black womanhood, Black hair, language, the church. And I love how he's able to interweave all of these things and actually show the facets, like all these different facets and all these different, it's like a jewel, all these different jewels within this like kind of kaleidoscope of like what Blackness is in America. And for me, it's like I was in like the kind of the, I guess like conceited metaphors like is like that, the gumbo and how like Black people, Black folk are like this thing. And for me, it's like the root of it for me is actually like, Marlon's ability is both like his death and his life is like that thing that holds it and it becomes this binding thing, and how he speaks through that work. And so that's like something that like right away, I just love about his work in general. It's like, he's able to like make it look, and also make it look easy. I mean, like just the deftness of his hand and like all of these things. But I guess a question for you, I guess, would be like, I kind of wanted to know, like, even towards the end, even now, it's like, what was actually like your last moment with him, actually?
Wow.
Yeah.
If I can remember a last thought. Okay. You know, it's interesting. I have not watched this in maybe it could be 20 years. I don't know how long. I haven't seen it in a long, long time. So I kind of felt like I was watching it with eyes as though I was not part of it, even though there were moments that I distinctly remember. In terms of my moment with him, as I mentioned in the introduction, my relationship with him started as a student and transformed into all these different things. And by the end, like everybody else who was in his life and loved him, you were also taking care of him as well, helping him get through this period of time. So, he showed up to work often when he could, and he was still struggling with the illness. And so it was about really trying to take care of him. I remember when he had to go on dialysis, it was, trying to be able to take him multiple times a week. So, everybody would chip in to take him in for that. So it was definitely, I think my memories of this experience is more about him than it was about the film itself, was because his death was the first time I'd ever gone through any kind of lasting terminal illness. And at that time, it was, the case. I think as I've stepped away from it, just realizing what he was going through personally, not only with his own health, but all his, a lot of his friends passing on at the time. I'm just amazed at his ability to keep moving forward. I know he talks a lot about ancestors and Harriet, but I think he embodied that he continued marching forward despite all that was going on, which was tremendous.
Thank you for that. So if folks weren't here in the introduction, I'll just quickly say my name's Chika. This is Ryanaustin. We co-curate a series here about Black life, and we're just so pleased to be able to speak with you, Nicole, who helped finish this film. Watching the film, I'm so struck by how powerfully a certain kind of healing energy comes through this film. And I was really paying attention to the soundtrack and the sonic landscape. And there's just so much in the sound. There's the chanting. We have so much of the Black spirituals. We have drumming. And then also you see this beautiful choreography and dancing. And you get Marlon singing. And all this kind of like adds up into something that's really, we're dealing with this broad scope of deep questions about what is it to be Black, and why is it such a recurring question for Black folks that am I not Black enough? Am I not Black in the right way? This is a question that I think is probably very deeply personal to the filmmaker, but also I also get this sense watching this film that these questions are being posed from a place of power and confidence. And it's really, it's just so striking to see this kind of balance of this really deep searching questioning, but at the same time, this strong rootedness. And I wonder if you can say anything about where you think that may have come from in Marlon, and how it is that he was so able to show up in such vulnerability, but so strength at the same time.
I just think he was a genius in so many ways. I don't even looking at it now and, knowing how much he shot when he was well, and all the different interviews with all the literary greats and how he was able to do that, capture Bill T. Jones, all of the stuff he did, go to LA and, around the time after Rodney King, and capture that footage. Like, he had a vision somewhere with where all of this stuff connected. I remember even the whole Black is Black Ain't chant, which he created, and the collection of people he gathered together to actually pull that off. You just can't explain it. I think, and clearly this, like much of his films, it came from a deeply rooted personal place where he was sharing a huge part of himself and what he had gone through. And, Black identity, I'm sure most people who are Black have dealt to some degree with feeling ostracized for the way you talk or your education level, whatever it is. And I think he's a Harvard grad, very intelligent, dark-skinned, probably went through issues around that as well. So I think, he tapped into his own experience, but not in a way of being defeated by it, but using it and propelling it to help figure out how we can heal this experience. So,
And like with that, I think there's something of what I remember first seeing it and this like kind of like other time seeing it, I was like, oh, it doesn't really worry about like whiteness or like white people. Like they're not brought up. Like those images and that history of violence isn't brought up in particular ways. Of course, like slavery is acknowledged, and this is so much what I like about it. It's like Black people literally talking to themselves, about themselves, through themselves, representing themselves. And like, to me, that is so eloquent how he does that, and so important how he engages with that. And like, that's like, I feel like that's like this underlying philosophy that's like, he doesn't even have to like talk about it. It's just there. He's visualizing what that looks like, these multiplicities of these voices without this idea like there is a white. Like if I watched that, I would be like, oh yeah, like Black people exist. Like we exist. We have our conversations, and when we exist, we co-create ourselves. And I feel like that is so important about what I like about this film. Why it's just so exceptional. I just want to take note. Yeah, it's just like
yeah. I think one of the things too, I was struck having not seen it for a while was the footage from Inglewood and going down there and getting these compelling real comments from the young teens there, as well as the barbershop. It takes skill to go into a space like that and get people to talk in that way. The elder, I remember the elder from the older man throughout that provided the sense of wisdom. That was from the reunion in South Carolina. So his ability to get people to speak and speak honestly in a way that was real, I think, was powerful. So,
I mean, just candid. I was just like, how are you getting these people? Like,
they're strangers.
Yeah, exactly. They're all strangers. I also just want to speak to like, it was star-studded. Like in terms of like, I mean, you had Bell Hooks, Cornel West, Sean Wallace, Lyle Ashton Harris was in it. His work was, I was like, damn, like Bill T. Like it was like everything. It was like, and then, but to also bring them in a way that, again, that felt like they're a part of the community. They're not celebrities. They're like, they're
speaking for the community,
right?
Just
yeah, exactly.
As members of the community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they brought their own personal stories to it, right? And he was able to pull those things out, just like, I don't know. Yeah, how did just his work? What was his work ethic like? What's his? I'm
Yeah. I mean, I think we can see from the film that it was dogged.
Yeah.
That he's going on his deathbed, right? Still doing the work and still talking through what the film is meant to do or be. And I don't know. It's very beautiful to hear, his desire to connect to the very end. And I'm curious about this film, this is 25 years later, how it still feels so fresh and interesting in terms of our takes and our thinking about Blackness and about Black community or communion. It's just very interesting that some of these questions are still around. They may have different forms now, but I think this film still has a lot to contribute to the conversation. Thinking through questions of healing or community, communication. I don't know. It's just it's very rich.
Yeah, I think for me, what I said at the beginning, the sad part is we're still talking about it 25 years later. Like, where's the progress in terms of acceptance and being in a different place? So, yes.
But there's some progress now. I mean,
as I guess,
like queer Blackness, is a thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was thinking about. I don't know if either of you saw the show that came out last year on HBO. Terrence Nance's show. I can't. The title is escaping.
Yep. Random Acts of Flyness.
Right. Random Acts of Flyness, which connected for me with the chanting, because in the first episode of that show, it's like this whole kind of incantation that's woven through, and it creates this certain, I don't know, I'm thinking a little bit about Marlon being the ancestor in this
The
case.
legacy, yeah. Like, I was like, that's actually a really good, but like, I was thinking, Terrence has such a great example, I think, of that. And I was also thinking Jin and Kiru's work. It was like, she's like a UK-based filmmaker, but like she has a kind of like a documentary, and she uses, again, like kind of mixed media, placing both like the reality of Black folks along with archival footage, along with audio being like these sequencing things. And I feel like his work is such like that, an essential point. And I think what could be possibly called like a Black queer film vision or a kind of legacy. And I feel like that's what I think is so interesting, because also I'm a filmmaker and I work in documentary. I'm making a documentary right now, and it deals with different sets of artists. And I'm thinking about how to engage with them on a candid basis. He is like very much in, like in my mind as I co-create with my co-director around how I want to engage with the work. Because also just like his ethics around it. It's just so, this is like a perfect like role model for like the ethics of documentary making, I think, and like being able to show and tell the story of people.
That brings up maybe an interesting question for you, Nicole, around maybe lessons that you've taken or felt, kind of still inform you today from Marlon and his work. If you can,
yes,
I know it can be a heavy one, but
I think for me, when I say he was influential, I went to journalism school. I thought I was going to be a print journalist, and I took a news production class that he was an instructor on, and then documentary. And I think when I saw Ethnic Notions and the work he was doing, which was not this kind of linear voice of God, but more, to me, it was like visual spoken word, where you were connecting all these dots, and by doing so, layering and making meaning. I think I became, I wanted to do something like that. And I can't say that I've gone on completely to do that. I think how it has informed my work is that I tend to think of things in a nonlinear fashion and try to work in that way, regardless of what type of story I'm trying to tell. Yeah.
That's cool. I think I've heard people talk this way about, or, talk about like queering film, queering narrative in the sense of, just breaking up that dominant way of moving through, which can, it just has such beautiful effect in this film. Like, it's so interesting to watch. It's so entertaining to watch, having all those different elements weaving together.
Boy, what was your favorite field kind of day? When like kind of going between all these different cities, what was?
Well, I didn't necessarily go on all of them. It was shared with a couple other people. The one I think that's most memorable is the one that was the one that I told him I was terrified to do was the African village, the family reunion that I found the day before we were supposed to shoot a family reunion. I had no family set up at all, from which we got the elder, and I can't recall the other one. And then, of course, there were just all the local shoots, going to Angela Davis's home when they did the interview, or the whole Black is Black Ain't in the studio. I will say that, Christian Badgley, who was interviewing him and was the editor and co-director on it, and had worked with Marlon on many projects before, did an amazing job in even deciding to do that interview at the end to be able to weave through, because I think she probably started to try and kind of document more what he wanted, because there was a tremendous amount of footage, and how to get it to connect. And I think, having those hospital scenes and talking to him from his hospital bed really elevated it in a way where you realize that this was, someone who was leaving us and probably was thinking on such a higher level than the rest of us, and kind of capturing who he was, his humor. For him to do that whole little musical thing, still, tied up to all these tubes. Yeah. And I think it was amazing that was the moment. And I also felt the way it ended, looking at it now, because it's, depressing in many ways, but the way to pivot to show the lighthearted, playful Marlon. So you get another sense of him from watching this, because most of the film he was getting sicker throughout. So,
and I love the just him running naked through the woods and how he says he wants you to use an abundance of that footage. It's just really works for me.
Yeah.
Do we want to go anywhere else, or do we want to open?
Yeah, let's open it up.
Yeah, so we have some time for questions from audience members. If folks want to ask, there's a microphone out there somewhere.
Can you speak a little on how this was received 25 years ago by the Black community?
I might have to. I don't know if I might have to ask Cornelius or somebody else to answer that question. How was it received by the Black community 25 years ago? Do you want a mic?
I remember it. It depends on who in the community we're talking about. Like we showed it at the Black Nations Queer Nations Conference in New York, where a lot of people were, including the man sitting next to me, Brian Freeman, and it was received really, really well. I think the sense I was having was that it was received respectfully, and that I had this. If Marlon had been alive, I don't think that's what he would. I think he would want something more controversial that gets people to sort of debate. And I think, the people who might have had a problem with it stayed quiet because the man had died. So I think there were various reactions, and that those are just two that come to mind.
And to just follow up on that excellent question, do you feel like in the 25 years since, his reputation has kind of grown in accordance with the excellence of his work, or is there still does it still need to be, lifted up more greatly?
Well, great. I mean, I think the reality of the attention to his work 30 years hence from Tongues Untied, and the work that Signifying Works and Vivian and Herman, and they're on the board of Signifying Works, and we've done to bring attention to his work. I will personally say I think I was sort of frustrated that there wasn't enough appreciation of what he had done, and enough written about him in an academic way, but I think now people are beginning to appreciate it more, and even acknowledging that he influenced their work. So there is. I mean, it is quite amazing after 25 years of his death. There's people are returning to, looking at his work, and it's really important as you have on the stage have acknowledged that there's the life to this work. I'm speaking from a position of being a California newsreel distributor of his work, and Ethnic Notions is the most used. I'm sure most people film on anti-Black stereotypes, and that's the one that probably is used in academia a lot more, and
because it still holds up.
It's just it holds up.
It holds up really well.
And Tongues Untied had more notoriety, and I don't know if as many people have seen it, but it still resonates, and I've met quite a few people, younger gay men, Black men, who will talk about how it really resonated with them, and was opened their eyes and influenced their work and encouraged them.
I will attest to that.
Thank you.
I wanted to say one thing about, in terms of like things that have changed over time, that the question of Black feminism and its work, I feel like that's radically changed, because it was interesting. We're like Black women. Like, I feel like there's been this infusion of like the politics of Black feminism has literally shaped this country differently, and
Yeah,
and I feel like the conversations are
Current
way
moment.
way more robust and interesting, and like so, but that was one thing. I was like, okay, I feel like that I mean, in a good way. Yeah, exactly. That was like obvious progress. I was like, all right, we're like, we can definitely be like, okay, this has gotten way better. Like, it's not like a no from Black men for the most part, but I mean, it's still, sections. But
Yeah, and I think it's less likely now for Black people to understand Black experience as the experience of Black men. It feels to me like we've moved away from that and are taking leadership from different places, and also just understanding ourselves in a more holistic and broad-based way.
I just wanted to mention Cornelius Moore works for California Newsreel, and Cornelius, why don't you just do a pitch on the website for Newsreel, because they have a great resource page on Marlon, which I just looked at again this afternoon. So.
Well, thank you, Jack. It's Newsreel, www.newsreel.org. And as Jack did mention, we have a Marlon Riggs resource page, with articles and about Marlon. And actually, we try to keep up on the various screenings and programs that are happening around the country and around the world in this year.
all right, check out YouTube too.
I have to find about that.
Yeah, check out.
I want to ask if there are any folks in the audience who have never seen this film before. If anyone wants to give a reaction, can we take your
I have never seen this film before, but it was very interesting to watch, because I remember when Michelle Wallace's book came out, and it was very significant for me because I think I was in my early 20s, and thank you. And so it was really great to look back and remember when I read the book, and now to see it as we're talking about how did this hold up in 25 years. And a lot of the things in this film were things that I experienced as I was growing up in my 20s. The whole thing about, I remember, I think I was in high school and I was talking to some friends on the bus, and some other kids said, "Oh, you talk white." And so just to see how someone, was taking all of those things that I had experienced as I was growing up and put them in a film, it really struck me. And then, as you were saying earlier, the whole notion of gumbo, because that was really significant, to have someone making gumbo and what gumbo is all about. You keep putting more things in to create spices and to create flavors that, hit the tongue in so many different ways, and having that as sort of some type of allegory in many ways to everything else that was going in the film. It's just an amazing film, and I'm surprised I'd never heard of it before. And I've been sitting here, that's why I had my phone in my hands. It's like, I need to know more about Marlon Riggs, because when I saw that this was coming, I said, I need to come and see all of these films, and I'm really glad for all of you who brought it. It's just amazing.
Thank you so much for that. I'm so happy to hear that reaction. And I'll probably see you at some of these films.
Hi, my name is Alejandro, and I just wanted to. I think the thing that stuck to me, there was a lot of things, and there was a lot of phrases that he said that I wrote down in my book, and I think one that I liked the most was looking at someone's heart, vision, and mind, and not just like the outer of someone. And I don't know, it just inspired me to like go out there and start making like content based on his sayings. And I mean, credit also him, but like, I don't know, it just opened up so much creativity to many things that are going on. But yeah, that's the main thing.
Yeah, it's like the documentary form doesn't have to be like, again, like talking heads or I mean, like, again, this stuff is like lyrical, poetic essay. It's like
And
like
dynamic.
and
I mean, there's so
dynamic,
much movement in this film. All the dance pieces, all the musical
yeah.
numbers. Like there's humor, there's movement. It's just a very interesting way to tell a story by showing a lot of different elements. Yeah. Someone else was. There's someone down front here. Or okay, I see a couple folks.
Hi. One of the most amazing things for me was all the footage of Bill T. Jones, and it was just so incredibly beautiful. But also realizing that he was being filmed at a time when he too was suffering the loss of his partner to AIDS. And the other thing that really struck me was all this stuff about toxic black male masculinity, and made me think about a book that I read many years ago that had a big impact on me, which was called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, and about how the impact of slavery was very emasculating for black men. And so it was natural that this came out as a way of trying to reclaim their sense of self. And so it's, even though, as you said, a lot of it didn't feature a lot of white people, a lot of this questioning of who you are as a black person, of your identity and your sense of self as a man or a woman, is because of that legacy. And there's still so much work that needs to be done, even so many years later, because some of the great art that's being made now by black writers like Terrell McCraney, who's also gay, and one of the movies that he made called High Flying Bird about the NBA made me realize how I'm a big fan of basketball and the NBA. Why there are no gay players? Because there probably are, right? And so there's still so much work that needs to be done in our society right now to make it okay to be gay and an athlete, to be black and to be gay, to be,
Yeah, whereas in the WNBA, we see many out players,
Yes.
many black women
exactly.
out and proud.
Yeah.
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 And I also just want to just gently push back a little bit against the understanding of the loss of black masculinity as being the reason or the excuse for black male violence, such as, I mean, we heard Bell Hooks tell that harrowing story, and I think that has so much more to do with patriarchy than white supremacy. I mean, certainly both are there and impacting everything, but I think we do ourselves disservice when we attribute that kind of male violence to some sort of understandable or necessary response to white supremacy. It's something very deep-rooted and dangerous, and it takes a lot of work and courage to root it out. I think her piece in the film is so brave. It's really just brings tears to my eyes. But I appreciate your comment very much, and I also just think, well, there's more to the story. There was this man in the front row here. Mm-hmm.
I was really knocked out by the empathy that Riggs had for the diversity of people that are in his largest community. I'm a Midwesterner, and there's probably a fair amount of appropriate stereotypical thinking that might be associated with what I'm about to say, but I'll tell you what I like. I like the films out here in the Southwest of Les Blank. And Les Blank is, in a way, his films are kind of like Riggs' films. They go to a small, particularized community, and they get into the food and the music and the life of ordinary people. And there's some of that in this film here. And the documentary maker that I sort of admire, but it's a failing of him, is Frederick Wiseman. And I don't know if how familiar you might be with him, but in the last 3 or 4 years, there's been a southern Indiana flourishing of documentaries. One of them was about a town not very far from Indiana University in Bloomington. It's called Monrovia, Indiana, and it's a very boring 2 hour film about people that are basically just living their lives. They're kind of a commercial small base for a rich agricultural area, and these people don't think of themselves as anything other than just doing what's natural. And it's not very interesting, I have to say. I've been in Berkeley myself for 50 years, not from Monrovia, but from the same state. And then there's a wonderful film about a sort of an architectural mecca not very far from there called Columbus. And again, people leave places like that. And then there's a third film several years ago made by a couple of young men from Ann Arbor that went down to the town in southern Indiana with the longest losing streak for their high school basketball team. And again, the sense that one gets from this, even if one is not from that part of the country, is that basically people there are not very much into becoming anything other than what is just natural that they be, which is just kind of cogs in a community that, the individuals don't self-actualize themselves, and to use a jargon phrase. And I like James Joyce. And the portrait
Before you go into James Joyce, is there
Sorry?
is there something that you're seeing in the Riggs film that you want to say is similar or different to
Well,
the
it's not that I'm contrasting these other filmmakers with Riggs. I'm complimenting him by saying what he's done, which is, I think, so remarkable. But I'm doing it not by saying much specific about. I plan to see several other films.
Great.
Okay, so but I can just tell you where I'm coming from, which is this is kind of opening up a vista for me about what other filmmakers might be doing. Les Blanc does it. Frederick Wiseman doesn't do it. And I think there's potential in taking...
But I could also note that there's another, I think when you were naming all of these other directors working in this document.
Name dropping.
Yeah. But I feel like there's this one recent film, Good Morning, Good Evening, Hale County. Yeah, this help. And I think in terms of I'm just thinking about the black directors and producers that are again experimenting with form, but and also using naturalistic, kind of like Les Blanc a little bit, but also experimenting with speed, time, editing techniques. And I feel again, I think Marlon Riggs' work, I feel like he's oh God, what's his name though? What's the name of the director? Ramel. Yeah. Ramel Ross? Yeah. And so I feel like Ross's work is again in this kind of I think kind of New Black's documentary cinema, where again it's really in using a different set of philosophical principles, non-linear, different editing techniques. Music and sound is used in these really interesting and compelling ways. And so again, I feel as an extension towards his legacy, I feel again these are really great contemporary works that definitely see that. But yeah, and someone up there.
on YouTube?
On PBS. I had a TiVo from, a year ago or so, and I got around to watching it 2 nights ago. And sitting here, I was just, and I'm totally unfamiliar with Riggs' work, and it just struck me, I feel very fortunate to have kind of had these experiences within a couple days, because it was very clear to me watching this that Ramel Ross was obviously very familiar with his work, and this film is a modernist or postmodernist take on a continuation of his work 25 or 30 years later, and it was so powerful to see his legacy, having seen that film that's from 2 years ago, and then getting able to see this kind of precursor to that. So I just want to say thank you to you for working on the film and creating it with him, and then also to BAMPFA and the two of you for bringing it to our consumption today. I feel very grateful. Thanks.
Thank you.
one little thing. What?
Well, a couple of things. I have taught some of Marlon Riggs' films, but I haven't seen this one before. So it's quite sort of, it's such an extraordinary film in a lot of ways. And some of the things that seeing this so many years later makes me realize about that historical moment. I mean, Riggs is also an intellectual, an activist, a filmmaker. He's many things, a professor. And I think it brings back to mind for me, sort of people like bell hooks and how they were really using theory and activism and drawing from what was happening culturally at that moment. And I think what is sort of astonishing about this film is how he brings in theory, the AIDS pandemic, issues around identity and blackness, and he brings it all together. And I think it's what makes this film really unique. I imagine people have written about this, but I think this is what really makes this stand out in a way. And it's an AIDS film too, where it's more meditative. He's not angry. And of course that moment, people were so furious with Reagan, with the drug companies. I mean, it was a horrible, very violent moment. It was a terrible moment, not unlike now in the culture. And so it's so interesting how he channeled this in a lot of ways and brought these different registers to the film. And, it's really pretty extraordinary.
It's like 2 more questions. Yeah.
Reflecting back on all these things that he was bringing together and the way he represented sort of the AIDS pandemic through this film in a certain sense.
Yeah, I think, when you look at Black is Black, you kind of have to look at it in terms of all his other work, and just I felt like it was a continuation. He had done after Tongues Untied a couple other pieces that will be screened, I think, at other times. No Regret, Anthem, a couple other pieces. So I think by this point, it almost felt like it was pulling together all these different elements into one film and kind of making a statement about, from his perspective, around identity and all that it entails. So I think the meditative quality could be partially the reality of where he was in terms of his illness, but also trying to make sure that all the other topics were given the kind of weight in order for it to weave together to make sense. So that would be my perspective. I cannot speak for him, but from looking at it, I think by having that meditative quality, it just made it way more powerful. It just felt like, as Cornelia says, how could you say anything negative about, for people that didn't want to say anything because he had passed on. Like, this was, his final words. And it was done in a way that you had to stop and think about it. Even if you didn't agree or wherever you were on your journey around acceptance, it was compelling.
Yes, it's so compelling. And I think it's such a sophisticated argument about identity that is well ahead of its time, I think. I'm reading contemporary writers who are talking about this sort of multi-layered identity and understanding some of the threads in the film are, the obviously queerness, but also mortality, I think, and he makes that analogy of, fighting AIDS, being kind of similar to being Black, like fighting against the odds and just feeling like, any kind of survival is a win. It's just very, very powerful, to bring it all together in his being. I think there was still someone on
Oh, hello. This is going to be absolutely unsurprising to hear, but one of the things that just struck me throughout watching the film was how relevant so many of the topics were to today and the discussions that are being held today. I am born after this film was released, and I've just grown up with a dialogue of the issues facing the Black community, and there are a lot of similarities. But what's been on my mind ever since the end of the film is just the differences. Because at the end of the film, I'm just thinking about my own experiences in the last 20 years of why hasn't there been a segment in that film about something like politics? How did the entire film go without saying the word Democrat or Republican? How is there not a section about police brutality and police violence? And there are some issues in there that I just have not heard too much in terms of the discourse. I don't really hear that much about the label of Black versus colored versus African American anymore. And I just thinking about this, I have a question for all three of you, but you in particular, Nicole. What would you do, or what would you think would be a way that this film, if made today, would be different than it was made in the 90s, either in content or stylistically?
I was thinking, this was post Rodney King, and this was way before smartphones and the ability to videotape and social media. So I think, if you rewind, and this is VHS time period, and you think about what he was doing then and where we are today, and we're dealing with Black Lives Matter in a huge way. I think, I don't know that politics necessarily was an issue, or at least contributed to this topic around identity. So I could understand where it didn't show up in the piece, but I do believe the context and the time period kind of determined or influenced what you're seeing. That clearly, if he was doing a film like this today, it would be much different because it's 25 years. So much has happened. It's, it's a different world.
I could say also, I think that the film, it is political. I think, we see Marlon Riggs wearing the Silence Equals Death t-shirt, and that's a political statement. And we hear Angela Davis saying, she has that line about, Black is beautiful was a statement of a political struggle, a politics of struggle, right? And I think this film, rather than being about a politics of struggle, it's somehow about this appeal to come together. It's sort of looking toward a healing of community, a coming together of community, even like with diversity, holding diversity within the Black community in a way that I think might, if this film were made, just as it is today, might get called like a sort of a self-care, being in a self-care paradigm. And I think sometimes we use that in a disparaging way, but it actually feels to me like a powerful plea for a different way of doing things.
I say yeah to that. I kind of like how we're kind of talking about, again, like you said, it's a healing film, a film that is about thinking through our stuff versus like this working against something. And I feel
at
like
the end of his life, that makes so much sense,
right? And I feel like that's such an interest. That's a modality in which I want us to kind of think of that as a modality in which a political film can work in. We don't always there's different ways in which that can work and function, right? It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be rage filled, even though it can be righteous rage. But I feel like, again, like meditative subtlety, creating connections, communing with people, connecting, like you said, it's funny they were talking about that, really dawned on me. I was like, yeah, that's what this film is actually, that's what it's moving. That's the spirit of the film.
Thanks for that question. Yeah. Maybe we'll take one last. Yeah.
So earlier you were talking about how 25 years later, it seems like we're pretty much in a similar moment. And I don't know if you were expressing disappointment or at least sort of the sense of what's happened, where's the lack of progress. And I'm thinking about watching this film, going into it, I thought midway through, perhaps this is really about not necessarily Well, actually, I should say what I gained actually from the end of watching this is very clear that this is a film about issues of Black identity made for a Black audience. And so it's not about the external forces, which is causing identity, questions of identity. And so watching this 25 years later, to me, it's very clear why this film still resonates and why it feels of the moment is because it doesn't matter how far we are removed from that time period in which this was made, because we're still having these same questions of identity and conversations within Black community or larger communities of what's going on. How do we see each other? How do we police our own behaviors? How do we feel part of a community? I mean, I was in college right post Obama, and I remember my African American psychology class, you could have put this film on then, and this could have been this great sense of all this progress and change and hope. And I think we would have still had that same resonance with the moment, because again, we could be 25 years from now and still be dealing with the same questions of identity and how we see ourselves, even with tremendous progress externally happening. It's just a thought of, kind of curiosity to see how do you think perhaps in 25 years this film's going to be received?
That makes me think of the teenager who's like, not about history. We need to study the future.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, he was real. He was like, you better learn about that IBM. He's like, on the edge. That's Afrofuture right there. He like, get a code, but a code. I was like, yes.
Profit.
Yes, really, truly.
It's all about coding.
So I think thinking about the future is a nice place to end, and I would just really like to thank the audience for showing up and being so attentive and listening, and really thank Chika and Ryanaustin, and thank you so much, Nicole, for being here. It's been a wonderful start to the Marlon Riggs series. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.